Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat. I am your host, George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C159 of the McKay Campus School at the university. And with me once again is my longtime colleague and trusty co-host, Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in north central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Well, Marty, today we're going to focus our attention on the chess Olympiads. Now, what do we know about the chess Olympiads?
Well, the Olympiads they're really one of my favorite events on the chess calendar. They're held every 2 years, and as the name implies, there are teams from all countries all over the world. You know, the powerhouses, you know, the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, the French, but also this year there were teams from the Faroe Islands and Zambia, all over the world. It's wonderful. You know, it's a great event.
They just concluded the 39th Olympiad in a place called Khanty-Mansiysk, Russia. That's in western Siberia. That got over early October. This is 2010, and they had over 1,300 players, both men. They had men's division and a women's division, and the Ukraine won the tournament, won the championship, and Russia was second, and
Armenia third.
Israel on tiebreak was third. Now the American team, we sent our strongest team. We sent Hikaru Nakamura, who was our top-rated player. We sent our national champion, Gadakamsky. We sent Alexander Onishuk. We sent Yuri Shulman. We sent some reserve players, Robert Hess, who was an up-and-coming, teenage grandmaster. But our American team finished ninth. They were ranked ninth, and they finished ninth on tiebreak.
Right.
Now, the United States has not won a chess Olympiad since 1976 in Haifa, Israel. But you know when the United States really shined, in the Olympiads? It was during the Great Depression, the 1930s. We won in 1931, 33, 35, and 37. We dominated.
And who did we have? Was it Brzezinski and Marshall?
We had not Marshall. We had Isaac Kashdan, Al Horowitz. These players dominated chess in the world during the 1930s. Now, it's interesting about how did the chess Olympiad start? First of all, in 1924. They held chess was part of the Olympics.
The Olympics, right?
Yes, the Summer Olympics. The Summer Olympics in Paris, and chess was allowed to compete. Well, after that event, the organizers of the Olympics says, you chess players, we don't know about you. We can't distinguish between the amateurs and the professionals.
Right, because at that time there was a strict division.
Oh yes, you had to be. You remember the Olympics were for amateur sports people. Nobody's for professionals. Right. So the Olympic Committee said, wait a minute, no, this is strictly for amateurs.
Right.
You guys,
If they had ever won any prize money, they really weren't considered amateurs.
Exactly.
That was the rule.
So when they held the Olympics in 1926, no chess.
Right.
But one of the best things that came out of that meeting, that event in 1924, is that the World Chess Federation was formed. On the last day of the Chess Olympiad in 24, they formed the World Chess Federation, which is known as La Fédération Internationale des Échecs. We know it more as the acronym FIDE.
Right.
So FIDE organized in 1927 the first official Olympiad in London. And they've been holding it every 2 years. Sometimes they did it annually and at regular times. But what happened in 1939, when World War II broke out, they didn't have it from 1940 through 1949. There was no Olympiads, and then they resumed in 1950, and in 1952. Helsinki, Finland
was the
host, and it was the first time the Soviet Union competed, and they won.
Right.
And they won for the next 12 Olympiads. They went from 1952 to 1974. They dominated. They won every single Olympiad.
Right.
Now, what we're going to, in fact, maybe we have a photo. Darren Dame, our director, may have a photo of the opening ceremony from this year's 39th Olympiad. This is a very elaborate event. They spent millions, tens of millions of dollars. This is a live chess game. These are actually, people dressed up in chess costumes at the opening ceremony of this Olympiad in western Siberia, a place called Khanty-Mansiysk, and we also probably have the logo. Maybe we have the logo of that Olympiad, of the 39th. Again, this is it. It says 39th Chess Olympiad, Khanty-Mansiysk. It ended October 4th. Now the next one, in 2 years, is going to be held in Istanbul, Turkey.
And do I understand that the United States is putting in a bid for a future Olympiad? Did I read that somewhere?
No, you might. That's wishful thinking.
Okay. Okay.
You know, the United States has never hosted an Olympiad because the cost is so huge. If we had a nice philanthropist who would donate tens of millions of dollars, we could possibly have an Olympiad in the United States. Now, but Bobby Fischer, the late Bobby Fischer, did compete in chess Olympiads for this. He represented this country.
4 times, was it?
I think it was 4 times. In fact, the first time was in 1960 in Leipzig, Germany, and then in Varna, Bulgaria, 1962.
Right.
He also played in Siegen, Germany, in 1970. He played in Havana, Cuba.
In Havana, yeah.
In Havana. So 4, yes, 1966. He didn't play in Haifa. In the one in Haifa, Israel. He didn't play in that one. All right.
Okay.
Now, the game we're going to present to our viewers is a game that Bobby Fischer played in 1962 in Varna, Bulgaria. That was the Olympiad, the 15th Chess Olympiad. And Miguel Najdorf was one of the leading players in the world.
Yeah, he was Polish-born, but he lived in and played for Argentina.
Yeah, and you know why why he became an Argentinian citizen? Because he represented Poland in the 1939 Olympiad. It was held in Buenos Aires.
Right.
And at the outbreak of World War II,
he was in Argentina.
He sought asylum. Right. He realized it would be dangerous to go back to Poland. He escaped the Holocaust because he was a Polish Jew. Yeah. His name was Mieczysław Najdorf. He's Polish. So he evolved into one of the greatest players, of the world. And he played Bobby Fischer.
Who at that time, in 1962, he was only 19, was he?
Yes, Bobby Fischer, 19, he was 19 years old. Now, Bobby Fischer had white. And what's interesting is, we'll talk about it as we go. We'll talk about it. Yeah. Let's present the game. Bobby Fischer opened up with, what did he open up with?
Well, he opened up with what was his favorite opening for most of his career was he took the E-pawn and played E2 to E4. We've talked about it before. It's one of the most common openings. It opens a diagonal for the white squared bishop, opens a diagonal for the queen, occupies the center square. It's one of the strongest moves to open with.
Okay. All right, so Najdorf on his turn. Remember, he had played Fischer 2 years earlier in Leipzig at the Olympiad in Leipzig, Germany. And he also played he also faced E4 against Fischer. So this time, Najdorf played the same move. He played C5. The pawn on C7 goes to C5. And what is this called?
Well, it's called the Sicilian defense. We've seen it before. We've discussed it. It's called the Sicilian defense, largely out of the history of the game. Sicilian players back in the 1500s, I think.
Yes,
perhaps,
late 1500s.
Favored this opening, and they developed it, and then the name caught on, and it's been kept that way ever since.
Yeah, and probably it's probably one of the most popular, commonly played defenses against the E-pawn opening. All right, so what did Fischer do here?
Okay, well, he played. There are a number of responses that white could choose, but he chose the most common, which is he took the knight on G1, played to F3, developing the knight, attacking the E5 and the really critical D4 square. It's the most common second move for white.
Yes, it is. All right, so Najdorf on his second move, he has choices here, but he decided to play D6. Pawn on D7 plays the D6. So that's his move.
Right. Now, one of the things that white wants to do is he wants to battle for this D4 square. He wants to control the center. So Fischer took the D2 pawn and played to D4.
All right. So now we're attacking the pawn on c5, and this next move is more or less forced. You know, black doesn't have much of a choice, and this is the 99.9% of the time. This is what black does. He plays c takes d4. Right. So we have a pawn taken on d4. Right. So how does White respond here?
Well, White he wants to recapture. He doesn't want to go down a pawn for no reason. He could recapture with his queen. He could play queen take d4, but the queen can be chased away from that square. And
with the knight. Knight coming out to c6, right, attacking the queen.
And the queen becomes vulnerable. It's probably playable if you know what you're doing, but it's not really the best move.
All right.
The most common move would be to take the knight on f3, recapture on d4, and now you've got the pawn nicely posted in the center. You still have the e4 pawn in the center.
Okay. All right, so it's Naidov's fourth move coming up, and he plays knight f6. The knight on g8 is played to f6, right, attacks the pawn on e4.
Right, so it attacks, as you said, it attacks the pawn on e4. White needs to protect it. He could, if he wanted to, play bishop to d3. He could play queen to e2. All those would defend it. Yes. But the most common and probably the best way to defend is to take the knight and play the knight on b1 and play it to c3.
All right. All right. So Naidov, fifth move coming up. Now he plays his pawn on a7 to a6. So a6. Now we have reached a variation of the Sicilian defense, which is widely known. What is this called?
Well, this is the a6 is a signature move for what's known as the Najdorf Sicilian. The player with the black pieces, Miguel Najdorf, was the leading theoretician for this particular line. So we have a situation where we have a young Bobby Fischer playing an established champion player he's literally playing the guy who wrote the book on this variation.
Exactly, because Najdorf contributed the most on the theory of this variation. And, you know, interesting enough, Fischer, when he's black, will play the Najdorf variation. Right. So he has faced this both as white and black.
On both sides
he's very comfortable on both sides of the board. All right, so now, what does Fischer do now on his sixth move?
Well, I mean, then it poses an interesting question. What do you do when you're playing against the guy who wrote the book? In general, White could play, you sometimes see g3 with the idea of fianchettoing the bishop.
Okay.
You could play the bishop to e2 or to d3 or to c4, any one of those works.
Yes.
He chooses...
Or even, I see a bishop coming out to g5,
to g5,
attacking the knight, threatening to double the pawn, taking the knight and doubling the pawns.
Yep. That's another line. Yep. But he picks an obscure line. He picks the sort of unobtrusive-looking pawn, moves the pawn on h2 to h3.
Now, this is an interesting move, because this is rarely seen nowadays. Right. And again...
partly as a result of this game.
Yes, I think because of this game in 1962, you don't see top-notch professionals playing this h3 move. By the way, this move, h3, is known as the Adams attack. Right. It was named after a Massachusetts-born master named Weaver Adams. He was born in Dedham, Massachusetts, and he was the one who's credited with this move.
But yet we haven't been able to find any games.
We haven't been able to find any games where he's played it. But he's been given credit for this. Right. So what does Najdorf do against this? Well, what Najdorf does, well, one of the reasons for a6 is to prepare queenside play, and he continues with b5. So that's his sixth move. Right. The pawn on b7 plays the b5.
Yeah, that's a really active approach to this position.
I mean, he had other moves. He could have played e6,
and those are somewhat quieter, somewhat more conservative.
Right.
So at this point, Fischer chooses a really odd-looking move. Fischer himself recommended the pawn to a4 as a possibility.
Yes.
He could play the bishop to e2. He could play it quietly if he wanted to. But he plays an odd-looking move. He plays a knight on c3 to d5, which takes away the defense of the pawn, which was the reason for bringing the knight out in the first place. He now takes away the defender on the e4 pawn. He also moves a piece twice in the opening, which is considered not a good idea.
No, as a rule, it is not good to move the same piece twice. Right. Or several times, over and over again in the opening. But here, Fischer, as you say, is actually offering that pawn.
Right.
All right. Now, Najdorf can take that pawn, but he didn't. Did he suspect there was something, underhanded about, allowing that pawn to be undefended?
Well, the thing that Fischer is looking at is are these what we call holes at C6 and C7 and B6. All these are attacked by the white knights, and so he really needs to figure out how he's going to contend with those threats. I think if you look at it, he probably doesn't want to take the time to go after a pawn and allow Fischer to mount an attack with those knights.
All right, so what Najdorf does here on his 7th move is play bishop to B7. Bishop B7. Now we have a double attack on the knight on D5.
Right, and that threatens to win the pawn.
It does. Okay. With the double attack, after the pawn is taken, we will recapture and win that pawn.
And there's no really reasonable way to defend that, or there's not really even a good reason to, because he's got a perfectly good move in taking the knight on F6 with check.
All right. So black has to recapture, and Najdorf doesn't recapture with the E pawn because that would give him an isolated D pawn. So he captures toward the center. He plays G takes F6. G takes the knight on F6. So now we have a semi-open G file. Okay. So it's Fischer's 9th move coming up.
Okay. Well, as a result of the bishop on B7, the E4 pawn is under attack. He could play quietly and just defend it with something like bishop to D3 or queen to D3. Would defend it. But once you've embarked on an aggressive, kind of very sharp variation, you need to keep up that kind of attack. And so Fischer chooses a very active move. He plays the pawn to C4.
All right. So he's leaving the defense of this pawn on E4, but he's now attacking this pawn on B5.
Threatening to...
3 different ways. Right. I mean, the pawn on C4, the knight here, and the bishop. So we have a triple attack on this pawn. So what Najdorf did here is he exchanged. The B pawn takes on C4. Right. B takes C4 is his 9th move.
Right. And Fischer is happy to recapture with his white squared bishop. He captures, bishop takes on C4. He develops a piece, puts it on a critical diagonal.
Right.
He's got a very imposing center here.
All right, but now at this point, Najdorf now captures. B takes the pawn on E4,
right,
and that puts him a pawn ahead.
He's a pawn ahead.
He's a pawn ahead. Okay, but he's behind in development because you see Fischer has 2 pieces developed, ready to castle if he wishes, but maybe castling is not timely at this point. So all right, so it's now Fischer's move. Right. He's lost the pawn.
Right. But Fischer does castle, in fact.
He does castle, right.
He does castle at this point.
Even though we have a semi-open file here.
Right. I mean, the bishop is on this pawn, and moving the rook over would be a very difficult attack to me.
Exactly. All right, so here is where Najdorf, on his 11th move, plays D5, which now attacks the bishop on C4.
Right. Now, Fischer could move the bishop if he wanted to. He could move it to safety. But again, he needs to keep up that activity. If he wants to maintain this kind of advantage in development and initiative, we call it, he needs to find moves. He could play queen to A4 check if he wanted to.
Yes.
But he chooses to centralize his rook. He takes a rook on F1 and puts it to E1. So should black decide to capture the bishop, he can capture black's
bishop. He can capture the bishop with his rook. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So what does Najdorf do now? Well, what he does, he plays his pawn on E7 to E5, and now this pawn is attacking the knight on D4.
Right. So now
we got two pieces
under attack. They can't defend each other. They can't. You have to find. Can Fischer find a way to continue his attack, continue his pressure, or somehow salvage these pieces is the problem that he's faced with. And so the move that he chooses, he plays the queen on D1 now to A4 check.
All right. First, okay. So now we've got to get out of check here. And the way Najdorf chooses to do this, he doesn't want to, he could block with the queen, but that would, well, that's a possibility, but he doesn't want to offer that queen exchange. He wants to activate this knight, so he plays knight to D7 and uses the knight as a blocker.
Right.
All right, so that's his 13th move.
So these two pieces are still attacked.
So yeah, right, exactly. We're still threatening to take one of those pieces. All right, so what does Fischer do now?
Well, he's already given up a pawn.
Right.
And so now he chooses what looks like a fairly surprising move. He takes the rook on e1, and he captures black's bishop, giving up what we call the exchange.
Yeah, and that is a surprise. Because anytime, see, a rook is called a major piece. He's taking a piece which is the bishop there. That's a minor piece. Anytime you use a minor piece, I mean, you give up a major piece with a minor piece, that's called winning the exchange. All right, so now you see Najdorf in this position could have actually...
Now there are three pieces
Yes, three pieces attack. Now which one does he take?
He's got his choice.
He's got a choice.
Well, he can't take the knight.
No, he's pinned. Right. The knight is taboo because it's pinned. Right. But he could take the bishop with the pawn on d5. But he takes his pawn on d5 and captures the rook, wins the exchange.
Right, the stronger piece.
So d takes the rook on e4. That's his move. That's his 14th move. All right, okay. So what does Fischer do now?
Okay, well, the knight is now under serious attack, so he needs to find a place to put it. He could come to c6 and attack the queen, though after that, there doesn't seem to be much. The queen would move somewhere.
Right, the queen could go to b6.
Right,
okay.
So it doesn't really... So he plays it to f5, which puts it on a very aggressive square. It blocks any moves by the dark squared bishop over on the king side.
All right.
It also attacks these two squares in front of the king and in front of the queen. So
all right.
Very aggressive spot.
All right, so because this bishop cannot move over anywhere on this king side, Najdorf decides to play his bishop on f8 and develop the c5. So now he's along this diagonal, along this a7 to a g1 diagonal, attacking the pawn on f2, but of course the king is defending there. Right. All right, so what does Fischer do now?
Well, one of the things, when you have your opponent's king still in the center of the board, one of the things you want to do is to keep that king there. You don't, even though there's an open file over there, you don't want him to get his king to safety. He's been spending all this effort putting pressure on the king. He's got the knight pinned, he's got the bishop attacking f7. So he wants to make sure that that king is going to stay in trouble. So the next sequence of moves ensures that king is going to stay in the middle of the board where it can be attacked. He plays knight to g7 check, forcing the king. The king has to move, forfeits castling.
All right. And one of the things that Najdorf realizes he shouldn't be doing is moving the king over to f8, attacking the knight, because what that will allow...
Well, because it would allow bishop to h6, threatening the discovered check, attacking the queen.
Right, exactly. The knight coming to e6. Yeah, right. Now the attack is threatening to win the queen with knight e6, discovered check.
Right.
So what he does, on that check on knight g7,
he has to move up.
He has to move up. He plays king e7. That's his 16th move.
And so now he's accomplished what he's wanted to do. He's forced the king to move. The king is forfeited castling. He's going to be stuck in the middle of the board. The knight comes back to f5. Check.
All right. And that means that Najdorf goes back where he came from. He plays king e8.
The difference is that he can't castle.
That's right. Actually, that knight g6, which is like a Zwischenzug, an in-between move, now did not allow the Najdorf to castle.
Right.
All right. So now what does Fischer do now?
Okay. Well, this bishop is... The black bishop is in a good square. One of the things you want to do is you want to, if you can, eliminate an active piece.
Right.
You don't want to give your opponent, and especially in a situation like that, you don't want to give him any counterplay, so he offers an exchange.
Okay. And there's also, by not only offering exchange, it's also going to bring this rook into play.
Right, it opens up the back.
It opens up for the rook to come over. All right, so what Najdorf did after Fischer's bishop e3, he took. Bishop takes the bishop on e3. Bishop takes e3 is his move, his 18th move.
Right.
And
now,
Fischer responds.
Fischer could recapture with the knight, bringing it back, but he wants to keep it in this aggressive spot, so he recaptures with the pawn and stops these pawns dead in their tracks.
Yes, and it's good to keep this knight here, because look at the control this knight has on these key squares here. All right, so now, Fischer just recaptured f takes e3, so what Najdorf does is plays queen b6.
Right, he develops his queen.
Queen is queen. He has, it looks like an attack down here on b2, which is undefended.
Right.
He's keeping the knight on us because the knight is defending the pawn on e3. So he's getting the queen into play. So what does Fischer do against
Fischer
this?
activates the rook, puts it to d1, threatening mate.
Ooh. Well, he's threatening the take here, right? Exactly. Yeah, it would be threatening mate.
Yeah,
yes.
mate next move.
Right. So what he does, he has to defend this knight. Knight can't move, so he plays rook a7 and defends the knight with the rook on a7. So that's his 20th move.
Then Fischer takes the rook on d1, brings it down to d6, attacking the queen. It's defended by that knight on f5, attacks the queen.
Yes. Not only does it attack the queen, which is the major threat, it also is attacking this pawn.
Right.
It's threatening to take the pawn because the knight cannot recapture because of the pin. But the queen has to move, right? So after this knight, rook d6, the queen now goes, because this pawn is attacked.
Has to come back to defend
queen
it.
comes back to d. It's an ugly move, but it's forced because the queen has to protect this pawn on f6.
Right.
All right, so now it's Fischer's 22nd move coming up.
So since that pawn is adequately developed, Fischer moves his focus. He takes the queen on a4, moves it to b3, now doubling up and attacking the f7 pawn, threatening to take that with check.
Wow. All right, so after we have now a double attack here. So he doesn't want to come here and defend. He could come with the rook over here to f8. Okay, but then this would allow. What would this allow here?
You could start with check.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah. Well. Yeah. He could force the king up. But what Naidorf did instead, he does the following. He plays queen c7. That's his move. All right. Now, why did he play here? And what did Fischer respond to that? Well, he's off. What he gets is getting off this pin. This is a very ugly, place to have the queen.
Right. And he's
which now allows at least the knight maybe to move. Maybe with playing the c5, attacking the queen. All right. So what does Fischer do now?
Continues his attack by playing bishop to f7 check.
Okay. Oh, well, then I can see the queen moves to c7 to also allow an escape square. For the king. So the king now.
Because if he goes the other way, then
yes. Yes, actually, then the rook. Well, no, he wouldn't take there. But this is very dangerous to be over here. He feels he's safe playing king to d8. That's his move. All right. So now what does Fischer do now?
Well, now he comes back takes the bishop to e6. Now he's threatening rook take knight check.
Well, look at this. He's also threatening here, and also that which would win the queen, as long as the queen is here. And nothing is gained by bringing the queen down here. Look at this move here. The queen down to c1 check, because we just come over here and hide.
And he's safe. There's nothing.
And we've renewed. And the threat actually
is to come
down here with the check here. Yeah, which is mate.
Right.
Because the king has no escape.
Right.
So nothing is gained by coming with any check. So in this position, after bishop e6, Naidorf resigned. He realized he's going to get mated. He's going to lose material, or he's going to get mated. So this game was a 24-move win. This was one of several wins that Fischer accomplished. Now, I don't know whether our director, Darren Dane, has photos. I know he has photos of Fischer from Olympiads. Let's see if Darren can show any photos of Bobby Fischer. This was played from the same Olympiad. Right. Bobby Fischer's on the right, and Mikhail Botvinnik, the world champion in 1962. This was played in Varna. And what's interesting about this is that, that Bobby Fischer came to Fitchburg 2 years after that photo was taken, and Bobby Fischer gave a simultaneous exhibition at the First Parish Church, Unitarian Church at the Upper Common, and he presented his game against Mikhail Botvinnik from that Varna, Bulgaria. From played in Bulgaria. Well, chess fans, we hope you enjoyed today's offering of this game, Fischer versus Naidorf from the 1962 World Olympiad in Varna, Bulgaria. I hope you come back to it and see us next time for another edition of Chess Chat. Stay tuned.